Before we get started, there will be some spoilers for the remainder of the 1000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. So at this point in our Bankai theory crafting journey, we've looked at the vast majority of Gotei 13 vice captains, from Izuru Kira to Rangiku Matsumoto, and yes, even Morechio Omaida, and we've devised numerous Bankai ideas for them all. That being said, there are still a few other characters with unknown Bankai left to speculate on, however, including a pair of vice captains who, by the end of the series, have actually become captains. Meaning that 10 years on from the end of the Quincy Blood War, Isane Kotetsu and Tetsuzaimon Iba should actually have Bankai themselves now. We just don't know what it is. And yet, with them now being captains, there's the distinct possibility that if the Bleach manga does continue in some form, we may actually get to see what they are in the future. Today, however, we're going to take a look at a character for whom there's sadly very little chance we'll ever actually get to see their Bankai, and that's the former vice captain of the 13th Division, Kaien Shiba, who was killed before the present-day Bleach storyline even began. Despite meeting an unfortunate end against the Hollow Metastasia, Kaien was a noted prodigy and an extremely talented Shinigami of noble blood. Not only that, but Kubo did at least give us the chance to see Kaien's Shikai Nejibana in action when he briefly made a surprise reappearance thanks to the 9th Espada Aranero, so we do actually have something to work with here. And if we're being totally honest, there's a lot more to work with here than there is for several of the vice captains who are actually still alive. And what we have to work with is rather interesting. Nejibana represents a rarely utilised element in ability design in Bleach, certainly in Zanpakuto design: water. And that's always been kind of surprising to me, considering water is often one of the most ubiquitous elements utilised in fiction. It's one of the most heavily designed around, but in Bleach it's never been tapped into all that much, no pun intended. Kaien obviously has a water Zanpakuto, Harabel has water abilities, Findor has some water abilities, and that's kind of it. I guess Tenjiro manipulates water, but even then he has a light-based Zanpakuto. Meanwhile, Hitsugaya uses water to some degree, specifically he utilises the moisture in the air, but really he's wielding an ice-type Zanpakuto for all intents and purposes. So yeah, this gives us the opportunity to dive into some refreshing and different Bankai ideas for both Kaien and Nejibana. As always, Kaien's Bankai could turn out to be literally anything though, and who knows, maybe Kubo will find a way to showcase what it could have been. Though it's unlikely Kaien knew Bankai at the time of his death in the first place, at least in my opinion, even though he was a prodigy. Alright, but let's take a look at some ideas for Nejibana and the Bankai of the deceased vice captain, Kaien Shiba. Before we get started on today's video, however, guys, if you enjoyed the video, consider supporting the channel by hitting subscribe down below. I'm trying to reach 300,000 subs by the end of the year, and it's only going to be possible with your continued support, so please consider hitting that button if you did enjoy the video. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, consider checking out my Patreon in the link in the description below. If you want to support the channel directly in a way that ad revenue simply can't, Patreon is the best place to do it, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month, but it really does all mean absolutely everything. However, at the end of the day, simply being here and watching the videos is already supporting the channel in a great way, so thank you all so very much. Alright, so before we dive into our Bankai ideas, first a brief look at Nejibana itself, and it will be brief, as this Zanpakuto has only ever been seen once in the manga. As Kaien points his sword downwards and then begins spinning it in a circle, uttering the release command "Rage through the seas and heavens," Nejibana takes the form of a long, silver trident as the weapon elongates and begins gushing water. A thick tassel of blue hair is wrapped around the base of the spearhead itself, while the opposite end of the polearm tapers off into a coiled, twisted point that resembles a seashell, or even the flower Spiranthes spiralis, as per the name of Nejibana, meaning twisted flower. While Nejibana can be wielded as a regular trident, with Kaien utilising an extremely effective and skillful flowing dance-like technique wherein he spins Nejibana constantly, twisting it around himself before bringing it both up and down in a series of brutal pendulum-like swings, the true terror of Nejibana comes in its ability to conjure and manipulate crushing water torrents, which Kaien can manifest in the midst of his battle stance. For example, during his showdown with Rukia, Aronniero, in the guise of Kaien, brings his trident down upon Rukia's blade with a hefty strike. But then, once their weapons are already locked in combat, he conjures a swirling mass of water atop the weapon itself, which then crashes down upon Rukia in an enormous blast. We can see from their fight that Nejibana is capable of producing a near constant churn of water at all times, that flows from and sticks closely to the weapon itself, even as Kaien is spinning and twirling it rapidly. But that's all we really get to see from Nejibana before Rukia succeeds in killing the Espada, but it is a tantalizing glimpse into a truly unique Zanpakuto, and one that feels like it could have potentially resulted in a genuinely menacing and powerful Bankai. The key when coming up with Bankai ideas for Nejibana, at least in my opinion, is to ensure that it still feels like it encompasses the dance-like majesty of the Shikai and how Kaien prefers to use it in combat. The trident itself has often been associated with deities of the sea, such as Poseidon or Neptune, and as such carries a considerable gravitas with it, even more so considering Kaien's position as not just a prodigy, but a member of the nobility as well. So these are just some of my own ideas, and I'm sorry you'll have to put up with my sketches once again, but I'd love for you to share your ideas for Kaien's Bankai down in the comments. Okay, so as always, the first Bankai idea is generally the simplest. With this first idea, Kaien drives his Shikai into the ground at his feet. From where the trident has struck the earth, a surging torrent of water explodes out and covers the battlefield, washing over everything. From there, Nejibana's Bankai conjures a crushing whirlpool that ensnares all the fighters in it, completely consuming and surrounding them on all sides, transforming the battleground into an arena controlled by Kaien. For reference, think the Sea Drift Act of Rose's Bankai Kinshara Butodan, but blown out to a much, much bigger scale. Once the fighters are collected within the whirlpool, Kaien can then control the walls of water with his Zanpakuto, using his trident to throw immense waves at the enemy, essentially spearing the water and dragging it with his trident, tossing it at his opponent. With the way Kaien jabs his trident into the whirlpool in order to grab at the water itself, the imagery is almost reminiscent of spear fishing, before he then launches the tumultuous wave at his opponent. And of course, should his target accidentally hit the wall of the whirlpool, they'll be seriously injured and thrown about the arena. This Bankai creates an inescapable vortex from which the enemy has no choice but to face down Kaien's control over this tempestuous force. This Bankai is nicely scalable too, with the stronger Kaien becomes over time and the more he gets to train with his Bankai, the bigger and more dangerous the whirlpool itself becomes. Eventually, I can imagine a future where Kaien's Bankai evokes a maelstrom instead, with the spinning of his trident creating a calamitous force from which escape is completely impossible. The next idea is something of a riff on that previous idea, but one that I think could be visually very interesting. So Kaien once again plunges Nejibana into the ground, and with it the water the Shikai had collected so far surges downwards, escaping into the earth. Then, after waiting just a moment, an enormous tremor begins to shake the battlefield. Cracks form in the ground, and water begins rushing from them, spilling out in waves. As the earth is churned beneath their feet, 3 gigantic trident prongs emerge forth, waterfalls pouring down their silver sides. Now, these trident prongs don't rise up together in the shape of Nejibana's actual trident. Instead, each prong rises up individually in a separate location, a separate part of the battlefield, forming ultimately a triangle around the combatants. From there, water rushes from the hole in the ground that's opened up around each prong, flooding the battlefield in a relentless surge. However, the truly dangerous part comes next, as this water is just a conduit for the actual Bankai itself. As Kaien spins his Nejibana, having retrieved it from the earth, the water around each prong begins to spin rapidly as well, with each prong becoming the epicenter for its own whirlpool. If you take the visual of the Soul King splitting the primordial sea into the three worlds, well, I imagine it looking a little like that from above, but only more furious. Those who are trapped fighting Kaien find themselves being thrown from prong to prong, battered on all sides by unconquerable waves as the Shinigami continues to spin his Zanpakuto, barely even having to move to take control and corner the battlefield completely. Of the Bankai ideas so far, and there's only been two, but this feels like the one with the least potential for growth in my opinion. After all, Nejibana is a trident, and the Bankai can't just magically manifest additional prongs when the triangle is supposed to represent the trident itself without losing what it's meant to be representing. To add an extra layer of intrigue to this Bankai, however, the triangle shape of the ability could also be a reference to the mysterious Bermuda Triangle, a region of the Atlantic Ocean infamous for the urban myth that numerous boats and people have all gone missing there over the years, with the turgid force of Kaien's water a representation of the deadly and often unpredictable power of the sea. Meanwhile, the force the enemy feels when thrown against one of the prongs as they reverberate is akin to water crashing against rocks, and emblematic of an elemental force that demands respect or your life. Okay, with this next idea, we are leaning further into the idea of Nejibana's Bankai being the catalyst for a powerful storm surge. Kaien lifts his Nejibana aloft, while the crushing tempest of the Shikai's water continues to swirl around him. A roughly ankle-deep layer of water seeps onto the battlefield, seemingly drawn to Nejibana itself from all across the land, and flows into the already churning torrents being generated by the Zanpakuto itself, embellishing them as they grow ever more furious. From here, Kaien is quickly surrounded by an enormous tornadic water spout, essentially a tornado that forms over water during immense tropical storms, but here said tornado is made of water and it rises up into the sky, constantly crashing and twisting violently. The idea behind the Bankai is to transform Kaien and Nejibana into a powerful, unstoppable force of nature. Were the Bankai to be observed from above somehow, it would appear as a typhoon atop the water's surface. Kaien can then move along the water, even with the surging water spout raging around him, opening up a gap within the water to strike at his enemies with his trident before retreating back into the torrent again. Of course, the torrent itself provides a continuous source of defense, with the rapid churn so powerful that it would rip the sword from the hands of most vice captain and lower level Shinigami who attempt to strike at it. On the downside with this particular Bankai, Kaien needs to keep spinning Nejibana even lightly to continue conjuring the tornado. But were he to speed up, the force of the storm would increase as well. Maybe at some point, if we want to go off the rails a little bit, were Kaien to grow even stronger and have the chance to train some more with his Bankai, his Zanpakuto could even evolve, becoming a water and lightning-based weapon in Bankai alone, leaning more into that deific side of Nejibana's imagery. The faster Kaien spins his sword, not only does the tornado spin faster in response, but it begins to generate electricity, lightning strikes that burst down from the clouds conjured in the sky above, as Nejibana's Bankai evolves to become a fully fledged tropical storm that cascades and rolls across the land. The fourth Bankai idea is one that I like the concept of, but I'm not sure how much it really makes sense. After we finally got to see Rukia's Bankai, Haka no Togame, I wanted to give Kaien a Bankai that resembled that somewhat to continue to emphasize the connection between the two characters. Now, of course, Kaien and Rukia don't have any kind of familial relationship or anything like that, so their Zanpakuto having any kind of resemblance or literal connection doesn't make sense, but I feel like it's a nice idea for the two to share at least some reflection, a little like how Tensor Zangetsu, at least the old version, and Hakano Togame looked almost like mirror images of one another. The idea here being that, thanks to their time together, thanks to how he shaped the earliest days of her as an officer in the Gotei 13, some of Kaien's spirit rubbed off on Rukia and was reproduced in her Bankai. So, for this particular Bankai idea, Kaien brings Nejibana in front of him and begins to spin it rapidly, a little like when someone uses the Kido spell Enkosen. This is a pretty simple Bankai, to be fair, like how Rukia's Hakano Togame sends a massive unrelenting wave of ice rushing towards her opponent. In this instance, Kaien's Bankai does the same, launching a tidal wave of crushing water at his enemy, which completely engulfs and swallows them whole, drowning his enemy in a cascade of power from which they can't survive. To add a little flair to his Bankai, I was thinking of making it so that when the tidal wave is conjured, several horses made of water would stampede through the tidal wave as well, as a direct reference to the Roman god of the sea, Neptune, who famously wields his trident while riding upon his chariot, which is being pulled by several seahorses. The thing is, Kaien doesn't really have any overtly direct comparisons to the likes of Neptune outside of using a trident, so I can't help but feel like the horse imagery might feel as though it comes out of nowhere a bit, but I still like the general idea. Maybe, instead of horses, if we want to stick more rigidly to the theme of Nejibana itself, the tidal wave of water could coalesce and swirl towards the enemy in the shape of the twisted flower or the seashell-like design that we see on Nejibana's handle itself, maybe even impaling them in the end with the full might of the sea. And that's actually pretty cool. I quite like that idea upon reflection. Speaking of a familial connection or a lack thereof, it's a bit annoying that we've seen so little from the Shiba clan. It's clear they all wield various elemental Zanpakuto, or at least powers of some kind, with Kaien wielding water, Isshin wielding fire, Ganju utilizing earth with his Seppa, and Kukaku, I mean, she kind of uses fire as well, and I wonder if this was before Kubo had decided upon making Isshin either a Shiba, or hadn't even thought of Engetsu's abilities yet, but either way, it still works. I mean, maybe you could argue Kukaku wields wind, but I don't really see that, to be honest. Anyway, what I'm getting at is we don't really see any of them using traditional powers, and we don't get to see Engetsu's Bankai, so it's hard to make any direct comparison to the Shiba family in any potential ideas for Kaien's own Bankai. The final idea for Kaien's Bankai is the most kind of out there of them all, which is usually how these videos go, but I also quite like it. There's been a running theme throughout this video so far that all of Kaien's Bankai ideas evoke the relentless and unforgiving might of the sea, and that he maybe even has a connection to the sea gods of mythology. So what if Kaien becomes a god of the sea himself? Once the Bankai is activated, the entire battlefield is plunged into the depths of the sea. Think Act 3 of Kyoraku's Bankai, with both Kaien and his enemy finding themselves at the bottom of the deep, dark ocean. Of course, it's just an illusion, but to both combatants, it does indeed feel as though they are swimming, as was again the case with Kyoraku's Bankai. In this form, Kaien's Shikai vanishes. The blue fur wrapped around Nejibana's spearhead transforms into a huge flowing collar that comes to rest around Kaien's neck, while his Shihakusho turns white as he effectively becomes one with the water around him. There's a rippling effect on it, it's pretty cool. Meanwhile, the prongs of his silver trident take the shape of a crown that he wears upon his head, again giving him the vague appearance of Poseidon. In his Bankai, Kaien is technically unarmed, but he now wields the very force of the water himself. Imagine the fishmen from One Piece. Kaien can now swim with the speed, elegance, ease, and efficiency of a fish, moving about the undersea depths at a rocket's pace, darting and diving so fast that his enemy can barely keep track of him. When Kaien wants to attack, he pushes his palm forward, sending a blast of the water's rippling depth at his enemy, effectively bombarding them with missiles made up of immense density. the ripples slamming into his target with the force of an enormous crushing hammer or something, to a crippling effect. I like the idea that underwater, the water that completely surrounds them on all sides now is almost like Kaien's personal canvas, which he can move and throw freely. He could punch the air, or the water, I guess, in front of his enemy, and they'd be struck with a delayed but massive attack that then sends them reeling. Honestly, this might actually be my favourite of the 5 ideas that I've presented to you today. I always feel like you never want to go too over the top, or over-design a Bankai to the degree that it's unrecognisable, that it risks being impossible to be traced back to its Shikai, as Kubo never does that. He always manages to make a Bankai feel grand and yet grounded, in the sense that it's connected to the Shikai that came before. But I don't know, this feels like an extension of the Shikai in that Kaien was famous for his dance-like flow and skill with the Trident, and that's now evolved to the point where he himself moves like that through the water, even if it's maybe the most abstract. I think that's pretty awesome, to be honest. But that's it for Kaien Shiba's Bankai 5 different ideas for what the Bankai of Nejibana could actually be. Which was your favourite? Which makes the most sense to you? And which is the likeliest? Or perhaps you don't think any of them are that likely and instead could see Nejibana's Bankai being something completely different. Whatever the case, make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As I said before, I always try my best to keep the Bankai ideas as realistic and as grounded as possible. When people over-design them, I can't help but feel as though they stray away from what Kubo tries to do, and I hope I've been able to capture at least some of that feel today. With this Bankai, the core thing to remember is that we want to capture the beauty and majesty of the untamed sea, while also delivering on the danger and power that it wields as well. So make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. Thank you so very much for watching. I really do appreciate having you here, and I hope to take something of value away from it as well. Make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Like I said, let me know your ideas for Kaien's potential Bankai. I'd love to hear them. And of course, consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already to help support the channel. It really does go a very long way, just like supporting me over on Patreon does as well. And as always, I want to say a massive thank you and give a huge shout out to all my supporters over on Patreon, including all of the new ones who have joined recently. It really does mean absolutely everything, and thank you all so very much for your continued and wonderful support. Alright everyone, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.